On October 29th, 1929, the richest country in the world lost its mind. In a single day, 16 million shares changed hands on the New York Stock Exchange. Billions of dollars evaporated. Investors leaped from buildings. Banks locked their doors. And within 3 years, 1 in 4 Americans had no job. Everyone blamed someone. The bankers blamed the speculators. The speculators blamed the banks. The public blamed Wall Street. Wall Street blamed Washington. And Washington blamed everyone else. But nearly a century later, the question still doesn't have a clean answer. Who really caused the crash of 1929? Today, we're going to look at 5 suspects. And by the end, you might be surprised who's actually guilty. To understand what broke, you first need to understand what was built. The 1920s in America were unlike anything the world had ever seen. World War I had left Europe in ruins, but the United States had emerged not just intact, but dominant. The factories were humming. The cars were rolling off assembly lines. Radio, refrigerators, telephones, an entire new world of consumer goods was flooding the market. And for the first time in history, ordinary people, not just the wealthy, could buy into the stock market. Chauffeurs, cooks, housewives, bookkeepers, everyone was speculating. Everyone was getting rich. The Dow Jones Industrial Average increased 6-fold from August 1921 to September 1929. 6 times. In 8 years. Economist Irving Fisher, one of the most respected minds in the country, declared that stock prices had reached, quote, a permanently high plateau. He said that in October 1929, 2 weeks before everything collapsed. So what went wrong? Who pulled the trigger? Let's meet the suspects. Suspect number 1, the speculators. Here's how the game worked in the 1920s. You wanted to buy $1,000 worth of stock, but you only had $100. No problem. You put down your $100 as a deposit, called buying on margin, and your broker lent you the rest. If the stock went up 10%, you doubled your money. Brilliant. But if it went down 10%, you lost everything, and you still owed the broker $900. By 1929, brokers' loans had reached $8.5 billion, more than the entire amount of currency in circulation in the United States. Think about that. People were borrowing more money to bet on stocks than there was actual cash in the country. When prices started to fall in October 1929, brokers sent out margin calls, demanding their money back immediately. Investors who couldn't pay were forced to sell, which drove prices lower, which triggered more margin calls, which forced more selling. It was a death spiral, and the speculators had built it themselves. Guilty? Partially, but they didn't act alone. Suspect number 2, the banks. Over 90% of all banks had invested in the stock market, not just with their own money, with their customers' deposits, the money you trusted them to keep safe. They were betting on Wall Street. And it gets worse. Banks were giving out loans to anyone who asked, to buy stocks, to build companies, to fund schemes that had no business being funded. Easy credit. For everyone. No questions asked. When the crash came, the banks were caught holding mountains of worthless stock and unpayable loans. By 1933, nearly half of America's banks had failed. Nearly half. People ran to their banks to withdraw their savings, only to find the doors locked and the money gone. A woman in Ohio who had saved her entire life. A farmer in Kansas who kept his money in the local bank because that's what you did. Gone. All of it. Gone. The banks didn't just fail their shareholders, they failed their neighbors. Guilty? Yes. But there was someone who was supposed to stop them. Suspect number 3. The Federal Reserve. The Fed was created in 1913 with one central purpose: to be the guardian of the financial system, to be the adult in the room when things got out of hand. In the late 1920s, things were very clearly getting out of hand. So what did the Fed do? First, it kept interest rates too low for too long, making it cheap and easy to borrow money and pour it into the stock market. It helped inflate the very bubble it was supposed to prevent. Then, in August 1929, just 2 months before the crash, the Federal Reserve raised its discount rate from 5% to 6%. A sudden tightening. Exactly the wrong move at exactly the wrong time. It spooked investors and helped tip a nervous market into full panic. And after the crash, when banks were failing across the country, when the entire financial system was bleeding out, the Fed stood by and watched. It didn't cut rates aggressively. It didn't flood the system with money. It tightened when it should have loosened. The man who was supposed to guard the vault left the door open. Guilty? Absolutely. But even the Fed had a boss. Suspect number 4. The government. Herbert Hoover became president in January 1929, riding the wave of the great bull market. He was supposed to be the president of prosperity. Instead, he became the president of collapse. Hoover and Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon led the way with optimistic predictions that business was fundamentally sound and that a great revival of prosperity was just around the corner. It wasn't just around the corner. While the economy was collapsing, Hoover's government did something almost unbelievable. It raised taxes and cut spending in the middle of a depression, taking money out of a dying economy. And then, in 1930, Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley tariff, slapping enormous taxes on imported goods in an attempt to protect American industry. Other countries retaliated. International trade collapsed. An American crisis became a global catastrophe. Hoover wasn't evil. He wasn't stupid. He was a man using the economic thinking of the past to fight a crisis that had never existed before. Guilty? Yes. But perhaps the most uncomfortable suspect is still to come. Suspect number 5. Everyone. Millions of American citizens poured their liquid assets into securities. Many invested their life savings, while others sold bonds and mortgaged their homes to invest billions in the stock market. Housewives speculated with grocery money. Bookkeepers embezzled company funds, hoping to strike it rich and pay it back before getting caught. There were warning signs. In September 1929, prices had already started dropping. A few seasoned investors pulled out, but the majority stayed because everyone around them was still making money, and no one wanted to be the person who missed out. There's a word for this. We call it greed, but that's too simple. It was something more human than greed. It was hope, the genuine belief that this time was different, that the old rules didn't apply, that prosperity was a one-way street. It never is. So, who really caused the crash of 1929? All of them, and none of them entirely. The speculators built a house of cards. The banks handed them more cards. The Federal Reserve lit a match. The government watched it burn. And the public, desperate for a piece of the dream, had been happy to keep stacking. What made 1929 truly catastrophic wasn't just the crash itself. Only approximately 10% of American households held stock investments, yet nearly a third would lose their life savings and jobs in the ensuing depression. The people who never touched Wall Street, who never bought a single share, who did everything right, they lost everything too. That's what makes it a tragedy, not just a financial disaster. By 1932, stocks had lost nearly 90% of their value. 90%. The Dow Jones wouldn't recover to its 1929 highs for another 25 years. Sound familiar? In 2008, a housing bubble built on borrowed money collapsed and took the global economy with it. Banks had taken impossible risks, regulators had looked the other way, and millions of ordinary people, who had simply bought a home, lost everything. Different decade, different asset, same story. The lesson of 1929 is not that markets are evil. It's not that capitalism doesn't work. The lesson is simpler than that. When everyone believes that prices can only go up, that's exactly when you should start worrying